everyone, I'm Nina Gopal. Welcome to Global Express. This is where we take a good hard look at developments in our neighborhood that have an impact on India and beyond. This week, it's the Taliban Emirate that has our full attention with the killing of Khalil Ur Rahman Haqqani, one of the key members of the Haqqani Network and one of the senior-most members of the Taliban government. He was Minister for Refugees and Repatriation, and he was blown up by a suicide bomber inside the ministry in the capital, Kabul. Well, violence in Afghanistan is almost a given. This assassination throws up a number of questions. Is it internal complicity or external orchestration, an internal power struggle, or the opportunistic use of ISKP, Islamic State Khorasan, by state and non-state actors? Or was it an inside job? This was clearly a huge security breach. Is this the first indication of a rift within the Taliban, between the Taliban's Amir, Haibatullah Akhundzada, and the head of the Haqqani Network, Sirajuddin Haqqani? And there are two other players, of course, in the game. One is Mullah Muhammad Yaqub, the former Amir, Mullah Omar's son, and Mullah Baradar. The US is picked to ensure that the Taliban would not stand in the way when the US withdrew its troops from Afghanistan 3 years ago. It was the US, it must be recalled, that put pressure on the Pakistan government and had him released from a Pakistani jail to take part in the Doha talks. But 3 years since the Taliban took over on August 15, 2021, and the Haqqani network being given unprecedented power, is it also no longer trusted by the Pakistan's inter-services intelligence? Is this Pakistan settling scores? I mean, the Haqqanis are paying a price for not reining in the jihadist terror groups like Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan that have made repeated attacks on the Pakistan army. Or is this Islamic State Khorasan, which has taken responsibility for the attack and has said, as its once better known, the Hayat Tahrir takes Damascus, is it positioning itself to take over and widen its footprint towards Afghanistan, towards India, and towards Pakistan? Some are even pointing fingers at the US, which we will hear more about from our panel. Our panel today have three eminent experts on the region. Sushant Sareen is an Indian journalist, editor, analyst of Pakistani affairs, and author of Baluchistan, Forgotten War, Forsaken People, and Corridor Calculus, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. He's a senior fellow at the Observer Research Foundation, expert on geopolitics, foreign affairs, and national security. Welcome, Sushant Sareen. Also with us is Professor Raghav Sharma, Director, Center for Afghanistan Studies and Associate Professor, Jindal School of International Affairs at OP Jindal Global University. He has a long association with Afghanistan and with China as well. Welcome, Professor Sharma.
Thank you.
And last but not least, my good friend, Sameer Bhasin, an independent geopolitical Afghan analyst, an entrepreneur too, who lived in Afghanistan for almost 20 years. He's played a major role now in re-establishing links with the Taliban Emirate, both through Doha Council and now in Kabul. Welcome, Mr. Bhasin.
Thank you.
Let's start with you, Mr. Bhasin. You've lived for years in Afghanistan. You've now reached out to the Taliban. I'm told facilitated India's reach out to the Taliban government, and both in Doha and Kabul, as I just said. You were almost fatally injured when the Indian embassy blast happened. If I correct me if I'm wrong, a blast that has been laid at the door of the Haqqanis. You were right across the road at your offices, and you've spoken about how you've been targeted since with this Haqqani killing. We asked this question: is Kabul sliding back to the kind of violence that was, seen as normal back then? How could a suicide bomber manage to get into the ministry? I mean, where security checks are very tight and where, senior members of all of these warlords and ministers are protected by a ring of trusted bodyguards and loyalists. How did a suicide bomber, manage to penetrate that security ring? Do you think it was an inside job, Mr. Bhasin?
So, I see Kabul, with my 20 years and with so many guns, in the play, it is very, very difficult to secure. There are 2-3 things. One is, of course, Haqqanis had their drivers, their loyalists, the security guards were all very closely, loyal and linked and screened. But that said, uh, uh, Khalil Ur Rahman Haqqani was coming
Afghan.
out of after his prayers, and normally, if you see his pictures, he always carried a gun, but a gun as little, protection against a suicide bomber. Rather, it's the reverse. So the point is that in these things of previous attacks, also there is some amount of it cannot just happen that it was a complete outsider. The current reports which are coming is that there is a Baluch connection. The suicide bomber carried the device in a cast on his hand, uh, and his name has also been appearing in certain media reports. So it's a mix. The thing is that uh, doing that, what I call the actually carrying out the attack, is not, frankly, not that difficult if you get to it, because we've seen various high profile targets being targeted. You saw what happened with Masood
But
also. So
yes,
there
but
is not a
Mr.
problem.
Bhasin, I would like to also bring in the fact that Maulvi Rahimullah Haqqani was assassinated, another Haqqani was assassinated in August 2022.
Right.
So was that also an inside job? I mean,
It
in
is
the
a
sense,
mix.
was it also?
Means the perpetrator is there, but they have some sort of through some means to infiltrate it, because naturally some security breach has happened, so that cannot happen without some inside involvement at some level, right? So that is there. The only thing is this: there is a lot of speculation of who to attribute this attack to. There are different
Hmm.
theories floating around, because I doubt that the Taliban will, go so far as far as the one motive or one theory of their internal rivalry is concerned, to do this, because if it is pointed, then there will be serious issues within the Taliban on their own structures. And the gentleman concerned was actually very important to Taliban as a whole, not only to the Haqqanis. He was the one who walked into Kabul, as you remember, and secured Kabul on 15th August 21. He was the
I
one
see.
who walked into Kabul and secured Kabul. He was a major logistics and financial, because now you're observing, including Nigeria and Germany, everywhere there are Fatihas, which is memorial prayer meetings happening on his passing away, not only in Afghanistan, but across the world. So,
That's
and
quite interesting.
and the last thing is that operationally he was linked to, from Al Qaeda to HTS to the TTP to ETIM to TIP. So because of all those links, it is very difficult to ascertain of what exactly triggered this. So there are different theories,
Okay.
floating around.
Yeah. So if I can come to you, Mr. Sushant Sareen, is it a message being sent to the Haqqanis, particularly Sirajuddin Haqqani, by Pakistan? Because that's a theory that's going around saying that there have been recent unexplained assassinations of key Tehreek-e-Taliban, Pakistan TTP commanders in Lower Paktia, which was a Haqqani stronghold, which is all being laid at the door of the Pakistan Inter-Services Intelligence. So, and the ISI is supposed to be very upset with the Haqqanis for funding and training the TTP, which has launched, as we all know, multiple attacks on Pakistan Army outposts in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and in Baluchistan. So, would it be correct to assume that the ISI could be behind the killing?
Well, I don't think you can rule it out because, look, as of now, the responsibility for the attack has been apparently been taken by the ISK, uh,
That's right.
and the Amaq news agency seems to have accepted that they were responsible for it. But then, is the ISKP an independent agent? Because there are reasons to believe that they too have links with the ISI. Uh,
Hmm.
Now, look, Afghanistan is a kind of a witch's brew. There are various factions. At some level, they are aligned with each other. At another level, they're fighting with each other. It's happened when the insurgency was going on. It's happening even today. The one theory, of course, is this Kandahar versus Haqqani kind of a tussle. Now, I completely understand that within any big organization like the Taliban, there will be contending and competing interests, as there are in Afghanistan as well. Uh, Maybe even some people want to take a slightly softer line which reaches out to the rest of the world. There are the hardliners who are aligned to Haibatullah. Within the Kandaharis, there is a section which says that, look, we need to be more pragmatic. Now, those are tussles that will go on in the movement. Does that mean that one faction is now ready to target another faction so openly? I have serious doubts on that. I think the Pakistanis are trying to plug that line. If you look at the Pakistani media, if you look at the Pakistani social media, they are actually exerting to spread this line or to give this spin that this assassination is the result of the conflicts within the Taliban movement. Which is why the moment I hear Pakistanis say it, my antenna goes up and I know that maybe the Pakistanis were actually involved. This has nothing to do with the internecine warfare. The second is, of course, the Northern Alliance or the resistance movement, whatever exists. But I think,
they don't have the wherewithal.
Yeah, it's virtually non-existent. It really is not a very potent, effective movement. The only guys who are very effective are the ISKP. But look, even the ISKP has very complicated relationships, right? At one level, there are reasons to believe that they have very close links also with the Haqqanis, and the Haqqanis don't mess with the ISKP beyond a point, which is why the ISKP has not been targeting the areas under the Haqqani control, and many of their operations have been focused more in the south, in Kandahar. And so, why would the ISKP, as a deliberate act, try and target Khalil Ur Rahman Haqqani? There is, then of course, there is the theory that there was some tussle going on between Siraj and Khalil.
Really?
I think that's rather far-fetched. I don't think that is going to be the case. Khalil Ur Rahman had always allowed Siraj to be the leader in that sense. And he played a very pivotal role, but I don't think he really was doing anything to undercut Siraj in any way, nor was Siraj feeling threatened by Khalil. From whatever I know, maybe Raghav has something else to say. I don't know, but this is from whatever I have learned. So the only plausible explanation, Nina, then is that it was actually the Pakistanis who were trying to kill multiple birds with one stone. So you get some of your ISPKP guys with whom you have links to bump off somebody like Khalil or Rahman Haqqani. What you do is then you start spreading this thing that this is part of the Kandahari versus...
And then tolerant rift.
So you sow divisions and suspicions within the Taliban movement, which, over a period of time will start growing, and then these guys will start fighting each other. The Haqqanis, if they start fighting within the Taliban movement, their dependence on Pakistan will increase, which means that you can then press the Haqqanis to take action on the TTP factor. But the Haqqanis can't do much about the TTP, even though they tried to bring the TTP back into the mainstream in Pakistan. But the TTP demands are such that the Pakistanis are balking. And they can't accept what the TTP is demanding. The TTP also has become pretty powerful. So if somebody wants to snuff them out, it's not going to be that easy.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
So it's really a very, very complicated kind of a thing with it's like Syria light in many ways, that every faction is fighting against everybody else and aligned with everybody else.
But I like that point that you made, that Pakistan has hit many birds with these many stones. I think this is exactly what it's all about. If I could bring you in, Professor Raghav Sharma, who was Khalil Ur Rahman Haqqani? Why was he such a dominant figure suddenly? I mean, for all the previous years, before we always connected Jalaluddin Haqqani with the Haqqani Network, the fact that he had this base in Pakistan's KPK, the fact that he had Miran Shah, and that he was the one who orchestrated the attack actually on the Indian embassy, right? So was Khalil Ur Rahman cut from the same cloth? I mean, what kind of role did he actually play with all of these groups, including, they say, even the East Turkestan Islamic movement and the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan? So it's not just, all the other factions.
He was a formidable, he was regarded as a formidable military commander, but not just a man on the battlefield, but, as Samir has pointed out, he was also somebody who was, in a sense, the liaison for the Taliban with, a plethora of other networks, be it the Al-Qaeda, be it the East Turkestan Islamic movement. One of the theories, again, doing the rounds was that Khalil Ur Rahman Haqqani also invited the wrath of Haibatullah and the Kandaharis because he was engaged in, sending off left behind American equipment via the ISI to China for reverse engineering and was making a lot of money out of it.
That's very
Um,
interesting.
but again, we are completely in the realm of speculation because we don't simply have enough information in the public domain. But he was a brother to Jalaluddin Haqqani, much younger to him. But the mantle essentially was always taken forward by Siraj. Khalil didn't seem to dispute that. So his assassination is significant. He was one of the first few past the gates of Kabul in August 2021. So his assassination does send a message. It strikes at the core of Taliban's power. His assassination is also ironical because the Haqqanis carried out. In fact, the Haqqanis and the Al Qaeda were the ones who got suicide bombings to Afghanistan. They embraced it. In fact, Sirajuddin recently at the Intercontinental Hotel hosted a huge ceremony where he honored suicide bombers and their families. So, his death in that sense couldn't have been more ironical.
And
Having
yet,
said that,
Sirajuddin Haqqani at Khalil Ur Rahman Haqqani's funeral said he didn't know who was behind the assassination.
yeah, just to pick on that, a couple of points actually emerged from what both Samir and Sushant have pointed out. One, I mean, it is hard to rule out the possibility that there was some degree of insider involvement. That is one. In fact, some of the reports that have surfaced in the Afghan media have been that the GDI, which is the Taliban's intelligence, has actually arrested two people, to employees of the ministry in which Khalil was assassinated.
Oh, I
And
see.
apparently, again, on Afghan social media, there are reports doing the rounds that there is footage that they've obtained which shows that the assassin was transported in a Ranger vehicle belonging to the Ministry of Interior, which is
Oh
headed
my
by
gosh.
Sirajuddin Haqqani. He was dropped off some blocks away from the ministry. So clearly, there are gaps in the security apparatus of the Taliban. There are gaps in the intelligence apparatus. But again, I would say, I mean, we really are functioning in the realm of speculation as far as looking at who precisely may have assassinated Khalil Ur Rahman Haqqani. The second point I think that needs to be noted is that arguably, there are schisms within the ranks of the Taliban. It is not a monolithic entity. In fact, the Pashtuns historically, have they've had a lot of segmentation. Social cleavages are
Yeah.
very pronounced. If you go back, in time, the Pashtuns of the seven Mujahideen parties, six were headed by Pashtuns belonging to different tribal and sub-tribal groups. The Zadrans historically have been far removed from power.
But yeah, exactly. It was always the Gil's eyes and the Popul's eyes.
Yes, and if you look at the fact that, Siraj, his assassination comes a week after Siraj had publicly lashed out at the leadership in
Yes.
Kandahar. He's
Yes.
previously been at loggerheads on the question of women's education. In fact, Hebatullah apparently issued a decree last month, which, banned the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Interior, and the GDI from distributing arms and ammunition in Kabul. So they have been apparently his the buzz also is that his deputy minister reports directly to Hebatullah. So yes, there are schisms in the movement.
Sirajuddin Haqqani's deputy minister or
Yeah,
Khalil Ur Rahman's.
Siraj.
I see.
There have been attempts to clip the wings, so there are certainly schisms in the movement. But does that mean that they've turned on each other? I don't think so. I think the Taliban is
If I can, yeah, I think the Taliban is anyway going to have that decision because the Kandahar, group is caught in another time warp, and caught in a time warp. And these are young, people who are now wanting a change. Would you agree with that, Mr. Basim? That Sirajuddin Haqqani would like to see, he's actually criticized the fact that they banned, the women's health care. And he also, I think, was also upset because apparently his area was being taxed, which has never happened before. Correct?
See, Nina, what the other speaker is also saying that, going so far as targeting each other will be hurting themselves. I doubt that, they would it logically. I think the story or the motive or theory has more credence may be an external hand, it
As in external
it
hand,
can
as
be the
in.
US for some reason, because you have to see, even it was not if you look at the history of the whole Haqqani network starting from Jalaluddin in the 70s, they were very close to the CIA. In fact, Jalaluddin
They
Rabbani
were.
invited to the White House by Ronald Reagan, right? But
Yes.
they
And
also
he used to make regular stops in Dubai. He used to
right.
come very
No, but
often,
that
virtually
said,
every other month.
they still attacked. The attack in 2008-9. They had high value target attacks, including Camp Chapman, was done by the Haqqanis. Okay, so it is a very mixed bag. See, the thing is, like they say, you cannot buy an Afghan, you can rent an Afghan. These relationships are very, difficult. There are no sides, and there are multiple players, and the equations keep changing. So I would give credence more, because internally I doubt that they would go so far, because if it comes to that, then they will start an all-out war, right?
You
Frankly.
don't think that's a possibility at all then?
I doubt. If it has happened. It can be. I'm not saying it is or it is not, but the plausibility is very, very weak. And then there's another theory. See, there are a lot of theories that they had trained people from the HTS, and it's Russia's and Iran's hand. So
Yes, that is
these are
very,
all
very.
speculation.
Mrs.
I
Saeed,
would
do you agree with
credit
that? Do you
more
think it's
to if there is a US hand.
Mr. Saeed, do you agree that this is just speculation? Because the ISKP was also behind that blast in Moscow and the attacks on the Shia convoy in Parachinar. Why would they, then be involved in at all in cutting down the Haqqanis? I mean, why would they firstly take responsibility? And is the ISKP objecting to the fact that the Haqqanis have a kind of a special place? I mean, higher up the pecking order, when dealing with the US and the West. Would that
No,
be
I
the
don't think
unacceptable line?
No, look, one of the reasons could be that if for all you know, because we are in the realm of speculation, I think we need to be very clear on that. For all you know, that although there are links between the ISK and the Haqqanis, and those links have been of long-standing nature, uh, every organization has its own agenda as well. So while they might be being linked up with some other organization at some level, but they also are plugging their own agenda. So let me propose something. If, for example, the Pakistanis wanted to bump Haqqani off because they wanted to sow divisions within the Taliban rank, the ISKP might have been interested in becoming part of it, because if the Taliban rank start fighting with each other, there's a factional fight within the Taliban. It kind of creates space for the ISKP. The ISKP is able to perform much better. The ISKP is able to occupy most territory in some ways, and expand its area of influence. So it makes sense for the ISKP to attack. I think this whole thing about the Americans being involved, I don't know, I would think it's a little far-fetched. Look, because the Americans are ready to do business with the Haqqanis now. Just as the Americans have, just turned around and started doing business with HTS. the Americans will sleep with the devil if they think it serves their purpose. So I don't think there's any morality or any principles involved in what great powers do, which is why they are great powers, and which is why great powers have great falls. Uh, but the thing is that I don't see why the Americans would be involved. Iranians really would have no real reason to bump off uh, Khalil Haqqani. I don't see what purpose of Iranians would come by bumping him off. In fact, the
You mean
Iranians.
the foreign hand is also saying it could be Iran?
No, but they, because we are in the realm of speculation. So and not because I'm necessarily biased towards Pakistan, but I think the alacrity with which Pakistan condemns an assassination tells you a lot about Pakistani involvement, right? The fact that if you look at who would stand to gain from something like this, and who had an
Yeah.
axe to grind with the Haqqanis, because the Haqqanis were supposed to be the Pakistani players in this whole game. That
Yeah.
even if the Taliban went out of sync, the Haqqanis would stand with the Pakistanis. But the Haqqanis said, no, we have sworn fealty to the Taliban Amir, so we are part of the Taliban. We are not part of Pakistan anymore. And the Haqqani said that, look, we have old relations with you, so we will try and facilitate talks between you and the TTP. But we can't push the TTP, the wrong way, and we are not going to do it for anybody, which the Pakistanis have seen as a kind of betrayal of their cause. Uh, Look, in this game, basically nobody is loyal to anybody beyond a point. And quite clearly, I think from the Pakistani angle, at one level, they've shown that they have the capacity to strike uh, as high value a target as Khalil Ur Rahman Haqqani. They have carried out many operations against TTP commanders in eastern Afghanistan,
I see.
including ID blasts, targeted assassinations, all kinds of other killings have taken place. There are reasons to believe they've used drones out there to target some of these guys. There are some reports that even aircraft have been used to target some of these TTP camps and others. The Taliban have kind of played it down because they don't want to play it up beyond a point. But if you look at how the Taliban have reacted, whether it's Mullah Yaqub, whether it is even the Haqqanis have not said anything publicly, but their underlings have been, not been very complimentary towards Pakistan. So the Pakistanis also have an axe to grind, and they are delivering a message. And in doing so, if they can sow divisions within the Taliban ranks, then why not? It serves their
Yeah.
purpose best. It doesn't serve
Yeah.
anybody else's purpose to bump off Khalil Ur Rahman Haqqani.
That's very interesting. Professor Raghav Sharma, could you tell us about something more about that? Because I mean, I also felt that the Haqqanis were promoting their own kin to a great extent. I mean, there was that article, Anas Haqqani's article, which appeared in the New York Times, which was clearly planted. And then you have, an ambassador from the Haqqani family. I mean, a member of the Haqqani family being named as ambassador to the UAE, and there's a lot of prominence given to Sirajuddin Haqqani. So would that have unsettled Mullah Yaqub for one? And secondly, where does it leave Mullah Baradar? I mean, he was the man who brought about this whole the conversation between Doha and the Doha Council and and Ashraf Ghani. I mean, of course, Ashraf Ghani lost out big time, but he was the man who did it. So where does it leave people like Mullah Baradar and Mullah Muhammad Yaqub?
So interestingly, Mullah Yaqub didn't attend the
The
funeral
funeral either.
either. And that has given rise again to speculation of growing tensions within the ranks of the Taliban. Um, just, I think yesterday, Sirajuddin Haqqani gave an interview to a local news channel where he emphasized that, there are no differences in the rank and file of the Taliban and they all differ to the authority of the Emir, which again underscores the fact that the Taliban are an ideological movement which lays a lot of emphasis on deferring to the authority of the Emir. So I don't think, while there are tensions, there are schisms in the ranks of the Taliban. They may be pronounced, but they are not grave enough for the Taliban to turn on each other. Mullah Baradar, didn't share or is not known to have shared really a very good relationship with the Haqqanis. And, if you recall, when they'd seized power in August, there were reports of a fist fight between Khalil and Mullah Baradar, and he was then, seen in Kandahar the next day. And they tried to paper over all these differences that existed. So they've never had a very cordial relationship, so to speak. And Baradar appeared to have been somewhat sidelined once the Taliban took power. He was tipped
Correct.
to be the prime minister, but essentially it was the old guard, who came before him, so to speak. So clearly, what we see is that Baradar was marginalized. But again, having said that, what is interesting to keep in mind with regards to what Sushant was saying of the ISI bumping of Khalil as a possibility, um, you know, the Haqqanis again enjoyed a very close relationship with the ISI.
Yeah, because they were seen as the arm, right? The arm of the
Veritable arm of the
ISI.
ISI.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
have business interests in Pakistan. The army never carried out military operations in North Waziristan, in an area where Haqqanis were very active. Yes, it could one could speculate that the Pakistanis had an axe to grind because of the TTP, and this really demonstrated or was meant to send out a message to the Taliban that they can strike at the core of their power, so to speak, now that the Taliban are not being so deferent to the Pakistanis. That could be it, but again, Baradar didn't enjoy a very good relationship with Pakistan. He was arrested and whisked off into
Yes.
prison when he tried to negotiate with Karzai, independent of the ISI. In fact, some say that they resent the hold that the ISI has over the Haqqanis, and that's also a sore point between the two factions. But yeah, I would say that there is an external hand, but which hand is it? It's very hard to sort of spell that out with a lot of clarity.
Yeah, that's very interesting that you should bring that up. Yes, yes, Mr. Sareen.
Yeah, no, look, everything Raghav has said is correct. My only point is that, equations change. The equation that existed at the time when the Americans were present in Afghanistan and the Haqqanis needed the Pakistanis. In fact, at that point of time, the Taliban needed the Pakistanis. So did you ever hear the Taliban say anything bad about Pakistan before August 2021? They always kept quiet. There were reports, or there was some talk that there is a lot of disgust for Pakistan in the Taliban rank, but the Taliban kept it bottled up until they achieved their objective. Now, the moment they achieved their objective, the equations changed, and then you saw openly how the Taliban always referred to the Pakistanis, and there's no love lost between them. One. Secondly, the same equation happens in the case of the Haqqanis as well. And from the Pakistani side, you remember MQM, Nina, you are an old Pakistan watcher. MQM was the favorite of the Pakistan army, right?
It was.
And suddenly,
MQM Haqqani. No, Hakiki. MQM Hakiki.
Yeah, Altaf's faction. And then they decided that no, this guy is a traitor and we got to get rid of him. Because, so the same thing happens with the Haqqanis, that look, we have given you so much space. We fought against the Americans for your sake. We gave you safe havens. Now, the moment you are firmly ensconced in Afghanistan, how do you return our favor? You say, okay, fine, you can talk to the TTP. I can't do anything about it. That is, you are an ungrateful wretch. And so I have nothing to do with you anymore. I'm not going to break my relations, just as Haqqani will not break his relations with Pakistan, because in this milieu, who knows who needs when, right?
Yes.
So you don't cut out your lines of communication. You keep your lines of communication open. You keep some relationship open. But on substantive issues, you say, you raise your hands and say, I can't do anything about it. The Pakistanis would not like it. So the Pakistanis would not do something directly, they would do it through some third source. That's the Pakistani modus operandi, right? It's always been. They don't dirty their hands directly. They do it through somebody else. Which is why I said that it seems much more likely among all the usual suspects, whom you can point to. My suspicion would go to the Pakistanis for the reasons I've stated. Simply
Yeah,
because
I think that would be the conclusion that most people would draw. And is there any link at all to the fact that the Hayat al-Tahrir al-Sham has come up in in such a big way in Syria, because they did the Haqqani network did have very strong links with them. They're the ones who trained the HTS in Nangarhar in Afghanistan. So was it could it be Russia or even, as you said, Iran, showing its anger at the Haqqanis training the HTS, and losing Syria?
yeah,
Or that's too much of a stretch?
yeah, it's I'm not entirely ruling it out. I think it's a stretch, and I'll tell you why. Who trained the Haqqanis first? The predecessors of HTS. It was Zarqawi and company, and the HTS guy Jolani has been part of that same amalgam, which was the AQ Iraq, and so they exported their suicide bombing technology to the Taliban. And later on, the
Yes.
Taliban re-exported it back to them. So, you take your pick on who trained whom. And why would the Russians bump off Khalil Haqqani? Look, again, great powers don't
It could be
bump off,
just a random jihadi.
and it does not change what has happened in Syria. So what are you trying to prove? So I don't think a great power would get involved in something like this. I don't see how the Iranian purpose would be served by bumping off a Khalil Haqqani simply because of what has happened in Syria. What has happened in Syria has happened. There's nothing anybody can do about it. And it has happened for a variety of other reasons, and not just because HTS guys had close links with the Haqqanis. All the jihadi organizations have close links with each other. The IS has close links with everybody. Everybody has close links with IS. AQIS, AQIP, you name the AQ, they all have close links. You name the local organizations from Morocco to the Philippines, they all have links with each other because they've
That's
all
true.
baked in the same ideology. They've all had some kind of relationship with each other. Where do you draw the line? So that is an endless kind of a game. So that is why I find this a bit of a stretch.
Mr. Basim, do you have anything to add on that point?
Yeah, I think Sushant is right. What I said is these are all, again, it's all speculation, but it can be a culmination of a few interests coming to bear. It's not, it cannot, it can be, means it's again speculating, but not this one interplay of two, three things coming together and, this coming about. But again, it's not very clear. But like I said,
Do you see any kind of reaction in the sense, just like we said, we're expecting Russia to, counterattack after the killing of their general by the Ukrainians? Do you think that there could be some kind of repercussions in Balochistan? Because, I mean, if this man is a Baloch, would the Afghans have, the Taliban government react to that in that way? Or would it reach out? Because everyone believes within the Pakistan's inner circle that the Afghans have given the Taliban has given refuge to the Baloch rebels.
so Baloch are collaborating with the TTP also. But then the thing will be that do I go after just to prove that I can, well, it's a structural problem. There are all these violent networks over there, right? If I say, okay, I'll settle scores because you killed one of mine and I will go after you, it structurally doesn't. I doubt Russia follows that. That's more of an Iranian thing, to do. So I doubt that, that will happen.
So, I mean, to come back to
And
also
adding
the
to Raghav's point, regarding Mullah Brother, see, if you ask me, Mullah Brother is still the key engager with the outside world. And you have to remember that he, like Trump calls him Abdullah, I
yes,
spoke Abdul, he says, I spoke to
Abdul,
okay.
yeah.
So his clearance is the highest because no one within the Taliban, he's the one, like I mentioned, Jalaluddin went earlier. He has the highest clearance within the US network. And as far as, yes, internally, he's been sort of asked to, is sort of kept in his place by Akhundzada. But as far as Afghanistan's external engagement is concerned, he's right on top. Means in terms
And
of
he seems to have positioned himself as an inheritor also of that mantle, of the Amin's mantle. Although he doesn't project himself as such, most people believe that it should have been him, not
yeah,
Akhundzada.
because you're right, because actually Akhundzada is junior to him. He was Mullah Omar's deputy because, as Raghav pointed out, he went to jail when, and it was actually an ISI-CIA team which picked him up in Karachi. You know, just to correct that, when he was trying to make an outreach to Karzai, you know, bypassing not only the ISI but even bypassing the Americans. So that and he was brought out of there by Ambassador Khalilzad in 2018 and taken to Qatar. So, you know, so I see him and his engagement with the whole Doha process as a key asset, if you, for a lack of good word, for the external establishment to engage with, you know, to speak to and to take him forward. The internal dynamics, yes, he lost because he was put in prison and he lost that position. Now it will all depend on, you know, again, determining who comes there is also not done totally internally. There is always an external influence in even deciding that.
What do you mean by that?
Means in the sense that they have their own, you know, networks and influences within the system to make things happen in a certain way, you know,
Yeah.
because
So, I mean, the point I also wanted to raise is that the opposition, you know, the Ahmad Masouds, led by Ahmad Masood, seems to have made no headway at all. I mean, the Taliban is the ones who seem to be making their presence felt across the world, you know, in Washington, Moscow, you know, talks in Berlin and so on and so forth. I mean, there was a huge exodus when Ashraf Ghani fled in the way he did. And, you know, the Afghan elite also have taken refuge abroad. So what is the reason that the Americans did not, I mean, the fact that they, through Khalilzad, of course, they had the Taliban, you know, put in place. But why is it that Ahmad Masood has not made any headway? I mean, at all. He's got no backing, no
can
arms,
I,
no
can I,
ammunition. Yes, yes,
yeah.
please.
You see, you have to be very clear. The Americans, as they charge their affairs openly tweeted, we have no room for resistance, right? So they go and try to find support even within the American administration. And I know people, I will not quote them, but they're well known, who try to form these fronts and try to go to senators and to Sigar and to, you know, different people and think that, you know, something will change because the eventual keys to Afghanistan are still held by the US. You know, other people deal with the Taliban for their limited purposes. But beyond a point, it is America who still holds the keys. And there, as you know, there are reports of $40 million or whatever being given every week to the Taliban. So not only that, they have other influences and assets on the ground, and you know they are still owing influence. And I'll just add one more point there. I think the overall game will flow with countering China's influence in this region. I think a bigger game will emerge post-Trump on that US-China rivalry will definitely play out in Afghanistan.
That's very interesting. Professor Raghav Sharma, do you think so? I mean, why do we hear Amrullah Saleh? You know, he's been very vocal on social media. Does he, you know, aspire to, you know, a leadership role? I thought he was completely sidelined by the Tajiks.
You know, it's again difficult to talk of Tajiks as a monolithic entity. Now, he may
Yes,
aspire
that's true.
to a role, but the reality is that, you know, in the 20 years that the Republic was in existence in Afghanistan, the Tanzims that had led the resistance to the Soviets and later then, you know, were at loggerheads with the Taliban, the Tanzims also got dramatically weakened over the, you know, 2 odd decades that the Republic was in existence. You know, particularly the second generation leadership of the Tanzims also experienced a disconnect, so to speak, from their constituencies, so wherever their strongholds were. Coupled with that, the regional dynamic has also changed very drastically. For any opposition to pose any viable challenge, it has to have, in fact, some rest and recreation facility in the neighborhood. Like the Taliban enjoyed their R&R in Pakistan. That's what
So a
Taliban fighters I
good way of putting
interviewed.
it.
They used to joke with me when I used to work in Kabul. They said, "Aapka R&R, your R&R is in Dushanbe or Delhi or Bangkok. Our R&R is in Pakistan. So we come, we fight, and go back for our R&R. We retreat back to Pakistan." When Masood was fighting against the Taliban in the 90s, he was kept going. He was kept going by the Iranians, by the Russians, and Indians to a limited
And the
extent.
Indians.
That has not, that's no longer the case. In fact, even the Tajiks, who were, very strident in their criticism of the Taliban, are doing business with them. And they admit that it's easier to do business with the Taliban for a variety of reasons. So that is one. Two, just like there are schisms in the ranks of the Taliban, there are serious schisms in the ranks of the so-called opposition, which is right now more or less seen as really, a Twitter force, an armed force of armchair activists, because none of the Tanzim leaders, not one of them, is on the ground fighting. And this has not been lost on the local Afghans. So while there is resentment in certain pockets against the Taliban, there are problems. People perhaps feel shortchanged, but at the same time, I don't think that they repose the same kind of confidence and faith in a lot of these leaders. And of course, as Samir pointed out, the external powers like the US, they hold very important keys, so to speak. And I don't
Yeah,
think
I want to come back to the US, but Mr. Basir, you wanted to say something?
Also, if we, I don't know, you've seen reports. Karzai recently traveled and he was back and he went to. So as far as I call them, after they've gone, it's 3 years plus since they've exited out of Kabul. They have very less leverage left. They can't. If that sort of political inclusivity or compromise, which was supposed to be negotiated in Doha as the part two process, as an intra-Afghan dialogue, which started post-COVID in September 17th, I remember, 21 or something. It never took off for several reasons. And now Karzai has traveled to 4 countries where primarily the Afghan diaspora and these leaders are living in Turkey, UAE, Germany, and the UK. So he's trying to build in some dialogue. But what I know from my sources in the Taliban, they are, it'll be, probably just to, say, okay, let's bygones be bygones and go on. But I don't see them getting any major political, we are not going back to a democracy in governance. So, you'll have this form of government and it will evolve as it goes on. So, they will be given some adjustments, which I don't see will be anything major. So, they have,
I mean, on that note, I mean, Trump has now trashed the way that the Americans left, the chaotic manner in which the US troops left. He said he wouldn't leave
Right.
billions of dollars worth of military equipment behind, and that and most of it now finding its way, as you all said.
Also, he wanted to retain Bagram.
He wanted to retain Bagram, yes.
No, in a way that it would not be seen directly, because they would have to do, as they say, wheels up at certain point, but give some excuse that they are coming back to do some humanitarian aid or leave some non-uniform residual back, so that he still has a larger footprint, residual footprint in Afghanistan.
Mr.
Yes.
Sareen, if I can come back to you about this India-Taliban relationship. I'm sure Sam and Professor Sharma can throw in their bit as well. But what is that relationship? Do we have a communication line open? I mean, you have Mullah Yaqub, who's actually requested that India train the Taliban soldiery, as soldiers. Would that make any sense at all?
So, Nina, before I just come to you, just a couple of things I wanted to weigh in on.
Sure.
on this whole Baloch links with the Taliban, I think we need to be a little careful on that. While both have a common enemy, that does not necessarily mean they're also cooperating with each other. I think there is a kind of a tacit understanding, if you will, if you can call it that, where they would not step on each other's toes as yet, uh, and that's not exactly cooperation. But
It's looking the
I
other
think
way.
it serves the Pakistani narrative to link the Baloch with the TTP, and it's give the dog a bad name and hang him. So one is that I think we need to be careful when we lump the two together. Secondly, I think on this whole Haibatullah case, we need to be very careful about it's not just Haibatullah who calls the shots. The real guys who are calling the shots and who are who are ensuring that there is no relaxation or there's no pragmatism, and that dogmatism of the Taliban rules are the guys surrounding Hebatullah. I don't think we should discount their role in this entire process. And these are the guys who also would want, because of their own ambitions, because of their own ideological predilections, who would probably also have some, issues with people like Mullah Yaqub, with people like Mullah Baradar, who are from the same fraternity, at least as far as the Kandhari Taliban are concerned. So there are wheels within wheels within wheels, and I think we need to be careful on that. Finally, on this Ahmed Masood, the guy, come on, he's not a serious player. I don't know why everybody, maybe it's how we are built as people from the subcontinent, that we see, the heir apparent of some old leader as the new guy in charge. What does the guy bring to the table? How many people does he inspire? His father was a different kettle of fish. But who is Ahmed Masood? Yeah? Just because his father was somebody does not make him a leader. What about the other leaders? All of them are so discredited because they literally raped Afghanistan, they looted it, and they've gone to cooler climes in Dubai, in Turkey, wherever else. Do you think they will find any support back in Afghanistan now? I doubt it. So, there would be some committed guys fighting, but nobody's going to help them. And forget the American factor. If the Americans are not banking an insurgency, it means nothing.
Sorry, you're frozen. Sushant? He's frozen. Okay, we'll come to you, Professor Sharma. You're back. Sushant, you were frozen. You were frozen.
Yeah, that happens sometimes when I say some things which are not quite.
No,
But
please
okay.
go back.
But
Please.
let me come to
Please
your
go
question on
back.
India and
Yeah.
Afghanistan. Look, I think
Yeah.
India's approach has been a pragmatic approach. I think a lot of people, to some extent, including me, would have had some problems, with the fact that we are engaging with the Taliban. But I think that's the pragmatic thing to do. That's the sensible thing to do because of certain security interests that we have, and certain strategic interests that we have. So what we've done is we've opened a line of communication. It's a fairly robust line of communication which has been opened. There is some talk of restoring at least a low level kind of diplomatic relationship. Uh, from the Indian side, from what we are hearing, is that there is absolutely no evidence as yet of any anti-India activity taking place in Afghanistan.
Okay.
Again, I would hold judgment on that particular aspect of it, because if Afghanistan becomes a highly radicalized state and allows groups like the Al Qaeda and others to continue to flourish, then it's just a matter of time before that anti-India activity will also start. So I think we need to be careful on that. But as of now, I think there is a certain comfort factor which the Indians have in dealing with the Taliban. What they promise, they deliver on. So, that is the pragmatic side of it. That there is a political side of it, which is a bit of a problem for the government in Delhi, because to be seen openly associating with the Taliban, having a Taliban delegation out here, giving them the due protocol, I don't know how it plays into the politics of the ruling party, domestically. So
A
maybe
very
that
interesting point, actually.
that could be a bit of a limiting factor, because that'll open them to charges of the opposition that, look, out here you're talking about something else, and there you're talking to the Taliban. You know how it works in Indian politics. So maybe that becomes a bit of a limiting factor. But I think within those limitations, the approach is to continue to engage the Taliban, to continue to deepen the engagement with the Taliban, because the conclusion that we seem to have reached, officially at least, is that these guys are here to stay. So, the choice of saying, okay, fine, Kutti, we are not going to talk to you, we don't like you, we're going to have nothing to do with you, is not an option for a country like India, which has very vital security interests attached to Afghanistan. So I think that is why I said it's a pragmatic approach that we've adopted.
Okay. Any concluding remarks, Mr. Professor Sharma, if I can come to you?
Yeah, I mean,
I don't feel that then there's going to be the Taliban implosion that everyone is looking at, given from the remarks that you guys have made.
As I've said earlier, I
You should
think
never predict anything
that's
about the
not going
future
to
in
come to pass anytime soon.
Sorry, Sushant, I didn't hear you. What?
I said you should never predict anything about the future in Afghanistan.
Okay, all right. Yeah, Professor Sharma, tell me.
Yeah, I think I would second what Sushant said, that, our decision to engage with the Taliban is pragmatic. It's basically in line with the existing realities on the ground, that these are the chaps in charge. The reality in Afghanistan, has changed dramatically over the last 20 years. As I said, the Tanzims have been weakened internally. The geopolitical situation at the regional level has also been reconfigured. And we have interests. I mean, we don't want a situation where we are completely outflanked by the Pakistanis and the Chinese, on the northwest, and they have a sort of completely free run. But having said that, I think the big challenge, and I'd just like to quickly build on that Sushant sort of hinted at, is radicalization, what we call as radicalization, quote unquote. That is something I think we must be alert towards, and that's because there've been changes in the curriculum. Madrasas have proliferated. A lot of my friends who I talk to, including some who have just boys, and luckily they have good jobs, they're all actually looking for options to send their kids abroad for education, because they say that the environment and the curriculum is changing, and they're quite concerned about what's unfolding. A friend of mine, who I will not name, is close to the Taliban, comes often to Delhi. Has essentially, he's well-to-do, so he's managed to send his kids off to Turkey, because he says, my girl, of course, can't get education, but the boys, he says, I don't want them to get the kind of education that is being offered at the moment.
That's very interesting.
That is a problem, and it's going to be a challenge we'll have to face, a couple of years down the line.
Yeah. Well, any last comment, Mr. Basir?
So yeah, like Sushant said and Raghav said, we have to engage with them for that specific reason. There's the other side of the coin. There is a strategy that we although have a historical goodwill with the Afghans, and if we step out, we have a lot to lose. But by staying in and by staying engaged, at least we are able to be there. And also we cannot change their domestic outcomes, whether it's women's rights or other issues. But looking at the geopolitical security and strategic geopolitical scenario, we need to continue to engage.
Anyway, so the point basically is that what the Taliban's policies are towards women are deeply troubling, and towards girls' education. And as Professor Raghav Sharma said, the Afghans themselves are choosing to opt out of that, and to move out of that restrictive kind of atmosphere. But I mean, the assassination itself, of course, is I think changes the dynamics a little bit in the Taliban. It's already divided between the Kandahar Taliban and the between the Kandahar lobby and the three men who are in deputies in the government in Kabul. I think there is going to be, I think, probably a power struggle between the conservatives and the young Talibs who want to leave the past behind. We will just have to wait and see. Thank you very much, Mr. Basim. Thank you, Sushant Sareen. And thank you very much, Professor Sharma, for coming on the show. Please click on the New Indian Express and Global Express and do share and tweet. Thank you.